Hi, this is Kylie with Fem and Flow. I hope everyone's having a great day. Today, I want to share something very alive in the field right now. I'm adding this bonus episode today because I felt it was very important to talk about. We have been talking about polarity, coherence, and in a previous episode, we specifically talked about the polarity flip equation and what happens when collective energy stretches to its limit. Well, after the 999 portal, I received a very clear update about the polarity flip equation, and I wanted to talk through it. I'll be doing a high level episode here and then a more detailed episode on Patreon. So let's start off about what the 999 portal is exactly. The 999 portal is a completion frequency. 9 is the number of endings of spirals coming to close so something new can begin. Triple nine magnifies that energy. It seals an arc. And just to give you some extra context, this isn't only about the date September 9th. We are actually in a 9-year in numerology overall. And you get that by adding up the digits of the year 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 5. That equates to 9. A 9-year always carries themes of completion, release, and integration. It's the final number before the cycle resets back to 1. So the entire year has been vibrating with that closing of chapters energy. Now, I want to explain this in a grounded way. These kinds of cosmic alignments or numerological markers aren't hocus pocus. They are the way the divine integration program expresses itself through time and number. Earth herself is part of a larger harmonic system, and numbers are one of the most basic languages of that system. When we move through a 9-year, Earth is essentially signaling to us this is a cycle of closure, of integrating what has been learned, and of preparing for what comes next. So when the 9-9 portal arrived this year, it wasn't just a moment, it was like a cosmic punctuation mark on a 9-year sentence. And the 999 amplified what was already encoded in 2025, making it a powerful seal on an arc that had been stretching for a long time. And within hours, we started seeing the collective reflect that sealed energy back in real time events. So, before I go into the three parts of the polarity flip equation, let's talk about why polarity has to shift in the first place and how we even got here. If you've been listening to my podcast for a while, you already know this probably, but it's worth repeating again if someone is listening for the first time. So, polarity itself isn't bad. It's actually how creation works. We need contrast, masculine and feminine, light and dark, expansion and contraction. Polarity gives us the tension that allows life to grow and for souls to experience choice. The problem is when polarity gets hijacked or stretched into distortion. And that's what happened on Earth. Instead of being a healthy dance of opposites, polarity became a tug of war. Fear and control on one side, emotional manipulation and confusion on the other. Left and right, division everywhere. For a long time, Earth has been stuck in this back and forth, what I call black hole mechanics. It's like a spiral program that keeps cycling us through lessons without resolution. Souls incarnate, grow, learn, but then get recycled back into another round of distortion because the program itself hasn't stabilized. That's why this moment matters. The polarity shift is about breaking that endless loop. Instead of oscillating between distorted extremes, the field is preparing to collapse into a new baseline, one of coherence. And if you want even more detail on this polarity flip equation and how we got to that point, go listen to the Hijacked Blueprint series episodes on my podcast. I just finished that part of the series and we're arcing into the Blueprint Restored. And the whole point of this series is to understand what happened, what's going on Earth, how we got here, and how to get back to our divine design, because this isn't it. So I feel it's really important to listen to the full series so you do understand the background and can turn it around. Because when you restore coherence within yourself, you become a beacon of light and you help on a planetary level. And that series goes into all of that detail. So now let's get to the polarity flip equation and just a recap of it. So we've talked about the three parts of the polarity flip equation before, but let me give a quick recap in simple terms. So to flip the polarity, there's three parts of this equation. And the polarity flip goes along with quantum physics, and I've talked about that before. I won't get into that in this episode though. So, the first part of the equation is awakening through questions. So, first off, enough people have to start questioning what's really going on. When a critical mass of souls begin to wake up and ask, does this make sense? Is there more to the story? It starts to shift the collective field. And people don't need to have it all figured out. Just starting to question things is enough for this part of it. So the second part of the equation is polarity is pushed to the extreme. So the second part, the opposites, left and right, masculine and feminine, fear and emotion, eventually get pushed so far to one side that the field can't rebound anymore. Instead of swinging back and forth, the whole system tips. That's when polarity collapses, and it's not into the opposite pole, but into whatever frequency is most stable in the field. And that's where the third part comes in. We need a new frequency to catch the collapse. So when that snap happens, the collective needs something stable to land in. And I mean this frequency wise. That's what I call the white hole scaffolding or the white hole stabilizers. This is a higher frequency field of coherence that stabilizers are already holding. Without it, the collapse would just recycle into the same frequency, the same dynamics, only with different names and different players. And on other episodes, I talked about different periods in history where we have had a polarity collapse, but there wasn't the new frequency scaffolding there to catch it. So we just flipped into more distortion. And all of this is why the polarity flip is such a big deal. It's not only about politics or culture, it's about Earth itself. For a very long time, what I call the divine integration program has been caught in black hole mechanics, endless spiral of distortion, conflict, and collapse. And all of this correlates to frequency bands that our Earth is in. And this program isn't a school or a test, it's an immersive experience, a place where souls come to explore polarity in its most intense form. But because the mechanics fell into distortion, that experience has repeated in loops rather than integrating into coherence. Many, many souls came in during this era, and even in earlier lifetimes, to help us reach this threshold moment. The mission is to finally flip Earth's program back into white hole coherence. That means instead of Earth being a kind of spiritual training ground where we recycle lessons over and over, she stabilizes into an eternal realm, a place where the divine blueprint is held steady and coherence becomes the baseline reality. I've shared before that polarity doesn't collapse through balance. It collapses through overextension. Imagine a rubber band. As long as it swings back and forth between two hands, it stays intact. That's what we see when left and right, masculine and feminine coded poles keep oscillating. That's what we see when left and right, masculine and feminine coded poles keep oscillating. But collapse happens when one side is pushed so far into distorted frequencies that it can't rebound. And that's the polarity flip equation. And when the band snaps, it doesn't swing into the opposite side, it snaps into a higher coherence. But that's only if the third part of the equation, the white-hole scaffolding, is in place to hold it. If there's not that third part of the equation, the white-hole scaffolding, then when it collapses, it just falls into that same distorted frequency. We might think there's change being had, but it's just the same distorted frequency under a new regime, essentially. Now, let's go a little deeper into this rubber band analogy. Because here's the thing, as long as the band keeps swinging back and forth, people stay trapped inside the oscillation. That's what distortion does. It doesn't just pull to one extreme, it yanks us back and forth between extremes. When we zoom out, this is the larger pattern at play. The group I've called the dark global elite know how polarity works. They know that if polarity were ever pushed to one side long enough, the field would collapse and possibly flip into coherence once the scaffolding is set. So their strategy isn't to let it collapse, it's to keep it oscillating. Back and forth, left and right, fear and emotion, masculine and feminine, always swinging, never stabilizing. Politics is one of the clearest examples. Throughout history, we've seen distortion on both sides. The dark global elite infiltrate different sides at different times, keeping people fighting and confused, and keeping the polarity band stretched between two poles. You've probably heard the analogy that left and right are just two wings of the same bird. And when we zoom out, that's true. But when we zoom in on current times, it's not quite that simple. In my own lifetime, I'm 31 years old, I see how both sides have been puppeteered at different points. The players change, but the deeper tactic stays the same. Keep people divided, distracted, and drained. Now, there's nuance here. That doesn't mean every single politician, leader, or cultural figure is in on it or just part of the show. We see this narrative too, that it's all just a show to keep people distracted and divided, and it's not quite that simple. There are people with genuine intentions who get swept into distorted systems, manipulated, or even hijacked themselves. There are also people with good intentions who get silenced or pushed out. And this is something I'll go into more detail on Patreon. But here's the important part of it right now. If we zoom in on the current cycle, one side is more infiltrated than the other. And that's the left, the feminine coded pole. Why? Because as we've seen in the hijacked blueprint, there has been an outright war against the feminine energy. And when feminine energy is wounded or unstable, it's much easier to manipulate through fear, guilt, and unchecked emotion. So what we're seeing right now is a nervous system imbalance at scale. Many people aren't anchored in their intuition. They're entrained instead into the hijacked fourth dimensional overlay I've talked about before. That makes the feminine coded pole especially vulnerable to infiltration right now. And yet, it's not black and white. There are archetypal figures on both sides who began with clean intentions and then got twisted, co-opted, or used in ways they didn't expect. This is part of the distortion too, hijacking genuine archetypes and flipping them for manipulation. I'll be unpacking specific examples of that on Patreon. So there's another layer to this. Some archetypal figures are here with missions that are polarity-coded. In other words, part of their soul contract is to embody one side of the spectrum so strongly that polarity gets pushed towards its breaking point. The role isn't to bring balance or coherence. It's to hold the charge long enough and loud enough that the collective can't ignore it. When this happens, it serves the equation in two ways. First, it stretches the band in one direction so far that collapse becomes inevitable. And second, it wakes people up. These figures push polarity so strongly that they act as catalysts, forcing people to start asking questions, to see through the illusion, and to recognize that something in the system doesn't add up. So we can think of it this way. On one side, you have polarity-coded figures whose very presence pushes the equation forward by stretching it toward collapse and awakening the collective. And on the other side, you have the white hole stabilizers, those of us who came to hold the scaffolding of the new frequency field. Both roles are essential. One brings the breaking point, and the other ensures that when the break happens, we don't spiral into chaos but land in coherence. And here's something else to notice about polarity coded figures. The way they stretch polarity isn't just through politics or culture, it's through triggering people. These are often controversial figures, and whether you love them or hate them, they stir something in you. When someone is triggered, it's almost never just about the person out there. A trigger is a mirror. It lights up something unhealed, unintegrated, or unresolved inside of us. And that's part of how the polarity flip equation works on a personal level. A figure pushes one side of polarity so strongly that it forces the collective not only to feel the tension, but also to confront their own shadows, blind spots, and attachments. So while on the surface it looks like division or controversy, underneath it's serving a deeper purpose to wake us up, to make us ask why we feel what we feel, and to pull the unconscious into the light. The discomfort becomes an invitation to integrate. And this is why polarity coded figures are so important. They stretch the band towards collapse at the collective level, and at the same time, they catalyze healing and awakening at the personal level. Both effects move the equation forward. And just to be very, very clear, let's talk about these trigger fields or these reactive carriers. So many of the ones getting triggered are not consciously here to serve polarity. Their reactions arise from the false matrix overlays, trauma loops, inversion programs, unresolved karmic density. When they lash out or amplify division, it isn't their sole assignment to hold polarity. It's the distortion field working through them. They're not bad or wrong. They're simply reflecting the static of the matrix, not the original divine design. These people are just very tapped into that false matrix fourth dimensional overlay, so it's almost just like mass psychosis. So the key difference, polarity nodes are intentional carriers of a pole working with the oversoul's plan, and then the triggered people are effects of distortion. It's often unconscious and not aligned with divine blueprint. Both can contribute to the visible polarity field, but only one is rooted in service to light. And when polarity nodes do their job, they generate enough tension to create synthesis. The triggered field then reveals where the matrix is still active. And this is why it looks messy. One is divine polarity, the other is distortion. But together, the oversoul field uses both to collapse the false matrix and usher in white hole coherence. So here's the paradox of that all. Even the hate and outrage directed at these figures ends up serving the equation. When someone gets triggered and sends out anger or judgment, that energy is like another tug on the rubber band. It adds more charge to the pull that's already being stretched. One person's reaction may seem small, but multiplied across millions of nervous systems, it accelerates the tension in the field. The more people who are triggered, the faster the band reaches that point where it can no longer hold a rebound. And that's why these figures are lightning rods. They draw out both love and hate, and in doing so, they speed up the movement toward collapse. So what looks like chaos on the surface, people fighting, arguing, projecting, is actually part of what makes the old system unsustainable. Distortion eventually burns itself out, and when it does, the collapse comes. This is why polarity-coded figures and white hole stabilizers are both necessary. One stretches the old frequency until it breaks. The other ensures the collapse resolves into coherence rather than just another round of distortion. And depending on your paradigm lens, you may read what's happening very differently. From one lens, it can look incredibly dark. The headlines, the division, the chaos. It can feel like everything is unraveling and only going to get worse. And in some ways, that is true. Distortion is burning itself out, and that process isn't always pretty. But from another lens, you can see the equation at play. You can recognize that all of this is stretching, all of this conflict, all of this triggering is exactly what moves the field toward collapse. And collapse is what makes the flip possible. From that perspective, the turbulence isn't meaningless, it's necessary. So, the invitation here is, which lens are you going to hold? Will you see only the darkness, or will you also recognize the deeper pattern? That this is the very pressure that births coherence. And here's the beautiful part. If you can see the pattern, if you can recognize the polarity flip equation underneath the chaos, that means you already are holding the field as a white hole stabilizer. Just perceiving the design anchors coherence. Awareness itself is part of the scaffolding. And so if you can see this equation at play, let that awareness guide how you move through your day. You don't have to do anything dramatic. Being a stabilizer isn't about carrying the weight of the world. It's about holding your tone in small, steady ways. It could look like pausing before reacting, choosing not to feed into outrage, or taking a moment to breathe and ground when the news feels so heavy. It could look like walking in nature, tending to your body, or simply remembering, I see the pattern, and by seeing it, I'm helping hold coherence. And each time you do that, you're strengthening the scaffolding. You're making it more likely that when collapse comes, the field falls into coherence instead of another cycle of distortion. And here's another level of it. If you don't necessarily see this pattern yet, and watching the news and seeing the darkness of society really makes you feel overwhelmed and it brings you down, just tune it out. Just focus on yourself, your own body, your own coherence. So now let's talk about what's happening now after the 999 portal. Let's bring it back to the present moment. What's actually happening right now in the days after this portal? Like we talked about, the portal sealed a cycle. It was like a cosmic punctuation mark that said, this arc of polarity stretching is complete. And almost immediately after, we began to see the collective reflect that sealing through real-time events, huge shocks, conflicts, and situations that made the tautness of the field very visible. Right now, we are in what I'd call the collapse arc. The band hasn't fully snapped yet, but the field is no longer just oscillating, it's tipping. You may feel this in your body as dizziness, nausea, fatigue, or a heightened sensitivity. That's not random. It's your system registering the tension. At the same time, triggers are intensifying. Polarity-coded figures are pushing harder, and the people are reacting more strongly. This is exactly what accelerates the stretch. From one lens, it looks like chaos and unraveling. From another lens, you see the equation. Distortion is burning itself out so that the flip can occur. And the most important thing to remember is this: the scaffolding is already being held. Stabilizers across the planet, maybe you listening, are quietly, steadily holding the new frequency. And that's what ensures that when this collapse does come, the field has somewhere coherent to land. So this brings me back again to the role of the stabilizers. Because, I mean, here's the truth. It's very much of if you know kind of thing. If you can see the polarity flip equation, if something in you resonates with what I'm saying, then that's your sign you are a stabilizer. Just knowing the pattern means you're already holding coherence. Awareness itself is scaffolding. This is where our role really matters. When the band finally snaps, it collapses into the dominant frequency that's being held. If coherence is strong, the field falls into white hole tone, into harmony, into the divine blueprint, rather than recycling into the same frequency with new characters playing out the same old script. Stabilizers don't always have a big platform or visible roles. Many are simply living their lives, quietly anchoring steadiness in their homes, their relationships, their bodies. But make no mistake, that quiet anchoring is what keeps the white hole frequency available for the collective to land in. So if you resonate, claim it. Know that your coherence matters. Every time you choose to breathe, to ground, to stay steady instead of spiraling into fear or outrage, you're helping shape where the field lands. You're part of the reason Earth can flip from black hole mechanics into white hole coherence. So remember, the collapse isn't the end, it's the beginning. And the more we hold coherence now, the more surely the field will land in harmony when the band finally snaps. So, to add even more context to this, let's talk about the stages of the polarity flip. So, the first step is the awakening arc, and this is the questioning. Enough souls begin to question, wake up. This doesn't collapse the band yet, but it starts shaking the system. And it seems like in the last decade or so, this was accelerating. We have disclosure themes, distrust of systems, and people leaving old paradigms. So the next step is the overextension arc, and this is tension building. And polarity is pushed harder into one side, with triggers and extremes showing up everywhere. This is when oscillation feels most chaotic, back and forth, more and more charge. And you've been living through this especially strongly the past 5 to 7 years. And the pandemic was a huge node in this overextension arc. So now number 3, the collapse arc. And this is where the tipping begins. And this is where we are now. After the 999 portal, the overextension sealed and tipped. The band hasn't fully snapped, but it's no longer just oscillating. It's leaning, collapsing into inevitability. And triggers intensify, events accelerate, and nervous systems register the unsustainable. White hole scaffolding is already holding to catch the fall. And on different episodes, I've talked about the white hole scaffolding and when that really began. So number 4 is the flip or the landing arc, and this is integration into a new frequency. So the snap actually happens. The field collapses into the dominant frequency being held, ideally white hole coherence, and reality reorganizes around the new baseline. And the tempo is that the last 2 stages go much faster than the first 2. The awakening arc is slow and gradual. It took decades to gather enough people questioning. And then the overextension arc is faster, but it was still years. Its polarity stretching across politics, culture, health, and tech. And then the collapse arc, it accelerates. Once collapse begins, momentum builds quickly. Think of gravity pulling a structure down once it tips. It doesn't stop mid-fall. And then the flip or the landing arc is the fastest. When the snap comes, the field doesn't linger in between. It lands in the dominant frequency almost instantly, though integration afterward may take time. So you could view the first half is the climb and the second half is the drop. The climb feels long, but once the collapse begins, the timeline speeds dramatically. So we're over halfway, and from here the arc accelerates. The flip itself is a moment, the instant where the frequency of this realm snaps and realigns to the white hole frequency band, but the new Earth is still a process. There will be an integration period that unfolds over years as people adjust, reconnect their bodies to God energy, and as new systems and structures are built to reflect that coherence. I see this integration happening in three main layers. Number one is in the body. People begin reconnecting their nervous systems, their fascia, their breath, their DNA to the coherence of God energy. The body becomes a clear channel again, and this takes time because so much distortion has to be unwound. But this is what we're talking about in the Blueprint Restored series that I'm releasing right now. And number two is community. As more individuals embody coherence, it naturally begins to shape families, relationships, and local communities. Old dynamics rooted in fear or manipulation fall apart, and new ways of relating, based in truth and resonance, start to take root. And then number three is systems. Finally, as the body and community layers stabilize, larger structures, education, healthcare, economics, and governance, will begin to reorganize. And this part takes the longest, but it becomes inevitable once enough people are living in coherence. The systems simply have to mirror what's happening in the field. And this is really the heart of it all, but I see this as a 10 to 15-year adoption window. The flip is instant, but the building of new ways of living takes time. Body coherence comes first, then community coherence, then systemic coherence. This is the transition and integration period where Earth shifts from being the divine integration program, a looping field of lessons and distortions, into an eternal realm, stabilized in white hole frequency. And many souls came specifically for this part, to help build out the new systems and structures that can hold coherence for generations to come. Some will innovate in health, some in technology, some in governance, some in art. Each contribution is part of rooting eternal frequency into matter. So now I want to add something important here. Even though this integration period on Earth may sound like a while, once you stabilize coherence in your own body and realign to your divine blueprint, your personal life will begin to shift drastically. You don't have to wait for the whole planet to catch up in order to experience coherence. The moment you reconnect your fascia, your breath, your nervous system, your DNA to divine design, you start living in the white hole frequency now. And that is exactly why I've been sharing this podcast arc, from the hijacked blueprint to the blueprint restored. These teachings aren't abstract concepts. They're the keys we need to reconnect to coherence in our own lives, to align to God energy in the body, and to anchor the divine blueprint again. The more of us who do that individually, the faster the collective can stabilize. So let's wrap it up. So after the 999 portal, know this: a cycle is complete, the collapse arc has begun, and don't get lost in the noise of events or the temptation to get caught in polarity. Hold coherence, hold your tone, zoom out and see the bigger pattern and equation at play. That's how we make sure the flip is not just another swing of the pendulum, but a true shift into wholeness. Thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more about how I experienced this personally and more details, I'll be sharing that in a Patreon episode. I love you all and have a great week.